I never intended to become obsessed with old photographs of blimps. It started innocently enough, a casual search for early aviation history, the kind of thing you do on a Sunday afternoon when you are curious about dirigibles and zeppelins. But within hours, I had stumbled onto something that made my stomach drop. Not one photograph, not two, dozens, hundreds actually. Images from the 1880s through the early 1900s showing massive airships hovering over buildings that were still under construction, not passenger vessels, not military craft, something else. And they were always in the same position, directly above unfinished structures, cathedral spires, government halls, exhibition buildings. The airships were not carrying passengers or observing from a distance. Cables descended from their gondolas. Rigging connected to the rooftops. They were doing the construction. And here is what stopped me cold. The official explanation is that these are photographic backdrops, promotional stunts, artistic composites. But that explanation collapses the moment you look closely, because these were not staged advertising shots. They were documentary images taken by municipal photographers, filed in city records, printed in engineering journals with no fanfare at all. The captions are flat and bureaucratic. Installation of dome structure, June 1893. Positioning of bell tower elements, October 1887. No excitement, no sense of novelty. Just routine documentation of something everyone at the time apparently understood, the way you would photograph a crane or a pulley. I'm Julian Crane, an archaeologist the establishment pushed out when I started asking the questions my colleagues wouldn't. So on this channel, I dig up the history they left out. If that's the sort of thing you want more of, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get into Tartaria's airships, the ones that lifted whole buildings into place, and why every trace of them was scrubbed from the record. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I began collecting the images systematically. Chicago in 1893. Berlin in 1889, Melbourne in 1888, St. Petersburg in 1891, Buenos Aires in 1895, San Francisco in 1896. Every major city on every continent, the same configuration, massive lighter-than-air craft positioned above buildings during the critical phases of their construction. And the coordination problem hit me first. How did cities across the globe, separated by oceans, by languages, by months of travel time, all adopt an identical construction technique at precisely the same moment in history? We are told these were independent developments, parallel innovations driven by the Industrial Revolution. But the photographs show something far more troubling than parallel invention. They show perfect uniformity. The airships were the same dimensions. The rigging used identical configurations. The positioning followed the same geometric principles whether you were in Prague or Philadelphia. Not similar, identical, as if crews around the world had inherited a technology without fully understanding where it came from. So I started asking the questions researchers apparently are not supposed to ask. Where did these airships come from? Who manufactured them? What propulsion held them stable during precision lifting? How did they achieve the lift capacity to position multi-ton architectural elements with surgical accuracy? And the silence was deafening. The engineering journals of the period mentioned the blimps in passing, the way you would reference a hammer or a wheelbarrow. But they never explain the technology. They never describe the manufacturing. They never discuss improvements or innovations. The airships simply exist, fully formed, in the 1880s records. And then, after about 1912, they vanished just as abruptly. No transition period, no debate about abandoning such valuable equipment, just silence, which raises a simple but critical question. What were they lifting? I looked at the structures themselves, and the buildings in these photographs were not modest. They were architectural marvels. The Chicago World's Fair buildings, the Budapest Parliament, the Vienna State Opera, massive domes that had to be placed with precision, bell towers with tolerances measured in fractions of an inch, ornamental elements weighing dozens of tons. And the deeper I went, the more impossible the official story became. Consider the mechanics. A conventional crane works by counterweight, leverage, mechanical advantage, and it needs a base on the ground to push against. But these airships operated on entirely different principles. They provided vertical lift with no ground-based support at all. They could position themselves precisely over any point on a building. They could hold enormous weight suspended in the air while workers secured it into place. And that is where the physics becomes impossible to ignore. Modern engineers will tell you that lighter-than aircraft lack the stability for precision construction. Wind displacement, pressure variation, thermal expansion of the lifting gas, all of it makes a blimp unsuitable for delicate positioning, and yet the photographs show them doing exactly that, holding cathedral domes steady in mid-air, supporting bridge segments, setting clock tower mechanisms with clockwork precision. Either the photographs are fraudulent, all of them, across multiple continents and multiple archives, or something is fundamentally wrong with our understanding of what was possible in the 1880s. I avoided the Tartaria explanation for months because it seemed too convenient, too conspiratorial. But the evidence kept pushing me toward an uncomfortable conclusion. The architectural style in these photographs, the buildings being raised with aerial help, they share unmistakable features. Star fort geometries, atmospheric power systems, harmonic resonance chambers. The same distinctive characteristics appear in structures worldwide, all supposedly built independently, all within the same narrow window of time. These were not just buildings, they were components of a larger system. Look at the basements, not simple foundations, but multi-level underground complexes with sealed chambers and pressure vessels. Look at the towers, not decorative spires, but antenna-like structures with metallic elements and specific geometric proportions. Look at the domes, not architectural flourishes, but carefully engineered acoustic chambers. The buildings themselves suggest a technology we have forgotten how to recognize, a technology for capturing, storing, and distributing energy through architectural resonance. And the airships may have been the installation system, the tools used to position these energetic components with the precision the network required to function. Ask yourself, why would you need aerial positioning for structures that could theoretically be built from the ground up with scaffolding and cranes, unless the buildings were not being built from the ground up, unless they required a specific orientation, a specific placement, a specific harmonic alignment that ground-based methods could not achieve, unless you were assembling a machine, not erecting a building. And when I examined the construction photographs more closely, that is exactly what I began to see. The structures in these images show no evidence of progressive construction, no partially completed walls, no visible timber framing, no brick-by-brick assembly. Instead, we see complete sections, entire floors, whole wings, massive dome segments appearing as finished, unified elements being lowered into position from above. The pattern repeats across cities, enormous prefabricated components set into place by aerial craft. But prefabricated where? With what manufacturing capability? Moved across continents by what transportation network? The official records stay silent. And think about what that silence has to cover. To lower a finished dome segment weighing 30 tons into place from the air, that dome first has to be cast, somewhere, to exact tolerances, then transported, intact, across an ocean, then held steady hundreds of feet up while it is fixed to the structure beneath it. Every step of that is beyond what the 1880s are supposed to have been capable of, and every step of it leaves a trail, a foundry, a shipping route, a crew, a method. And for a process that supposedly happened in dozens of cities across 30 years, there is no foundry, no route, no method written down anywhere. The components arrive fully formed and are set from the sky, and the paperwork that should explain how simply is not there. I found shipping manifests that listed architectural elements and structural components arriving at ports worldwide in the 1880s, but the manifests never specify an origin, never name a manufacturer, never explain how such massive, precisely engineered pieces were produced in an era supposedly limited to hand tools and steam power. This is where the investigation becomes genuinely unsettling. I searched for engineering specifications, construction manuals, technical documentation explaining how these aerial systems worked. I found nothing, not incomplete records, not fragments, absolute absence, as if someone had gone through and removed every reference to the technology. The construction journals of the 1880s discussed conventional building methods in exhaustive detail: bricklaying, mortar composition, timber joints. But on the aerial positioning systems visible in thousands of photographs, complete silence. The journals behave as if the blimps do not exist, even while municipal archives document their constant presence, and the erasure is not passive. Libraries have sections removed. Archives reclassified documents as lost. Engineering schools stopped teaching courses that appear in their own 1880s catalogues and left behind no textbooks, no lecture notes, no student records. The deeper I looked, the more obvious it became. And here is the most disturbing part. This was not gradual obsolescence. This was systematic removal. Patents related to aerial construction, filed between 1880 and 1910, were either destroyed in fires or reclassified under national security restrictions that remain active today. Photographs in city archives show damage, and not the kind you would expect. Not water damage, not slow deterioration. Deliberate defacement, in which the specific sections showing rigging and attachment mechanisms were scratched out, burned away, or cut clean from the frame. Someone did not want us to understand how these systems worked, and that is the detail that separates this from ordinary loss. When records rot or burn by accident, the damage is random. A whole page goes, or a whole box, or a whole shelf. It does not target one part of an image. But here the airships are often left visible, while the exact thing that would explain them, the cables, the couplings, the point where the sky met the stone, is the part that has been removed with a precision that matches the precision of the machines themselves. That is not decay, that is editing. Someone went through these archives with a specific goal and left just enough to prove the blimps were there while destroying everything that would tell you how they worked. Let me state this as plainly as I can. What I am describing could not have happened through independent development. Buenos Aires in 1895 used the exact same aerial positioning technique as St. Petersburg in 1891. The cable configurations were identical. The attachment points on the buildings followed the same geometry. The airships held the same relative position during installation, and communication in the 1890s was primitive. The telegraph could send text, not technical drawings. Photographs took weeks to ship internationally. Engineering schools were regional, isolated, and competitive with one another. And yet construction crews on different continents were carrying out identical techniques in perfect synchronization, unless they were not inventing these methods at all, unless they were following existing templates, unless the technology predated the supposed age of innovation entirely. The Tartaria explanation is that these were not new constructions, they were renovations, repairs to damaged infrastructure left by an earlier civilization. The airships were not innovative tools. They were inherited technology, perhaps the last functioning remnants of a more advanced aerial network. That would explain the perfection, the lack of developmental stages, the absence of failed experiments and gradual improvements. You do not see progression because there was no invention, only rediscovery, only the maintenance of systems that were already in place. After 1910, everything changes. The airships vanish from construction photographs, not gradually, not through some better technology replacing them, but almost instantly. Cities that documented aerial construction for 3 decades simply stop. Records that mention atmospheric lifting fall silent. New projects revert to conventional methods, even for the same kinds of structures they had previously raised with aerial positioning. Why would you abandon a superior technology? The official explanation points to the Hindenburg disaster of 1937, claiming it ended the age of the airship. But that disaster happened 25 years after aerial construction had already ceased, and besides, these were not hydrogen passenger ships prone to catching fire. The construction craft in the 1880s photographs operated on entirely different principles. Something forced the abandonment, and it was deliberate. I found fragments of municipal meeting records from 1911 and 1912 in which city councils discussed atmospheric safety concerns and unauthorized aerial operations. The language is deliberately vague, never specifying what the threat actually was, but the resolutions are clear. Cease all aerial construction immediately, ground existing craft, remove related equipment from public buildings, By 1913, the network was dead. The buildings remained, the cathedrals and the government halls and the exhibition centres, but their original purpose was forgotten. Their energetic functions were disabled, their connections to the larger atmospheric network were severed, and within a single generation, people looked at these structures and saw only beautiful architecture, never understanding that they were looking at the components of a planetary system which forces the question nobody in authority once asked. What were these buildings actually powering? A network of resonance chambers, pressure vessels and antenna towers, tuned to the atmosphere and connected across continents, is not decoration, it is infrastructure, and infrastructure does something: generate electricity, transmit energy without wires. Something stranger still, further out on the edge of what the evidence suggests, and the most disturbing hint sits in what happened after 1912, because the change was not only in the photographs, it was in the sky. Documented reports of ball lightning, once common enough to appear regularly in the record, thin out and grow rare in the decades after the network went dark. The behavior of natural electrical phenomena shifts. Weather patterns move in ways that are hard to fully account for. It reads like what happens when you pull the nodes out of a working system and the whole thing changes how it behaves. I am not going to tell you I can prove the buildings were controlling the weather, but when a planet-wide grid of tuned structures is switched off, and the atmosphere over that same planet starts behaving differently within a generation, that is not a coincidence you get to wave away. I have stood inside these structures now, not as a tourist, but as someone looking for evidence of their original function, and what I found does not fit the story we were told. The acoustic properties are impossible for decorative architecture. Sound resonates in patterns that should not exist. Certain frequencies amplify while others cancel out completely. The geometric proportions create standing waves that persist for whole minutes after the sound source has stopped. The basement chambers contain sealed vessels connected to nothing, serving no apparent purpose, except that the vessels are precisely tuned to atmospheric pressure variations, responding to changes in barometric pressure with mathematical precision, as if they were designed to draw energy from the movement of the atmosphere itself. The towers contain metallic elements set at specific intervals along their height, not lightning rods, not decoration, precisely spaced conductive materials that create electromagnetic gradients when the atmospheric conditions are right. These buildings were not monuments to human achievement, they were machines. And the airships were how you assembled a machine whose components weighed tons and had to be positioned in 3 dimensions with perfect accuracy. Once you see them as technology rather than architecture, everything falls into place: the global coordination, the identical designs, the careful documentation followed by systematic erasure, the sudden total abandonment. You do not walk away from functioning technology unless someone makes you. So ask the questions that actually matter. Who ordered the shutdown? What authority commanded cities across every continent to abandon, at the same moment, a technology they had relied on for decades? What force had the reach and the power to coordinate that? And these questions are not comfortable, because the evidence suggests the erasure is ongoing. Photographs continue to disappear from archives. Digital copies corrupt for no clear reason. Researchers who probe too deeply lose funding or find themselves pushed out of their fields. The machinery of forgetting is still running, still protecting something. And ask yourself, who benefits from that forgetting? Who gains when entire civilizations are convinced they invented everything from scratch, that they stand at the pinnacle of all human achievement rather than picking through the ruins of something greater? Because the deeper truth the evidence keeps pointing to is not a small one. It is the possibility that we did not build the world we live in, that we inherited it, damaged, from someone who came before, that we partially wrecked it or watched it be wrecked, and then told ourselves we had built it all with our own hands. A civilization confident that it is the first and the best will never go looking for the one it replaced. It will walk past the evidence every day, admire it, photograph it, and never once suspect that the beautiful old building on the corner is a switched-off machine, or that the empty air above it once held the tool that put it there. That confidence is not an accident. It is the most effective form of erasure there is, because it makes the people being deceived into the enforcers of the deception. I am Julian Crane. We live among these buildings every day. We admire their beauty, photograph their facades, hold our ceremonies inside their chambers, and we never once ask why they are so overbuilt, so precisely engineered, so mathematically perfect. We accept the official story that people with hand tools somehow raised architectural marvels that modern engineering struggles to replicate. We do not question the coordination problem, we do not notice the missing documentation, and we do not wonder about the airships in 1,000 photographs hovering like mechanical angels over structures being assembled out of the sky. The deeper truth is more unsettling than any simple conspiracy. We are not just ignorant of our own technological past. We have been trained not to look, conditioned to accept impossibilities as ordinary history, taught that questioning the story makes you a fool rather than an investigator. But the buildings remain, the photographs survive, the physical evidence persists in spite of every attempt to erase it. So the next time you stand beneath one of these impossible structures, do not just look at the stone. Look up, the way those photographers did, and ask what used to hang in the air above it, and who decided you were never supposed to know. I'll see you in the next one.